Could exercise endurance be improved by taking Capsimax? And I'm interested to know what carbohydrate sparing is and if there's a preferred fuel the body uses when exercising.
Well, the theory, of course, would be that if by using something like Capsimax, a capsaicinoid-containing ingredient or product, that you're able to mobilize more fat as a fuel source.
Okay.
If you're able to use more fat as a fuel source, then hence you might spare more glycogen, which is a storage form of carbohydrate in the muscle and the liver and other tissues. And if you're able to spare that glycogen, then you may be able to go longer, assuming you're performing long duration exercise bouts. So for an individual that's simply performing 30 minutes on a stationary cycle while they read the newspaper in the morning, I don't think this is an issue at all. For an individual that's going out and really pushing themselves, they're a runner, they're a cyclist, or someone that's training for 90 minutes, 2 hours at a time, that sort of thing, in which glycogen depletion may be a limiting factor to their overall endurance performance. If in fact this was able to increase the mobilization of fats or free fatty acids to be oxidized and used as a fuel source, then you may be able to spare some of the use of glycogen, and hence you may be able to perform longer at the same intensity, or perhaps at a slightly higher intensity for a shorter duration. That's possible. Again, we haven't seen the evidence for it, but it certainly would be possible.
I was wondering about the carbohydrate sparing, because you hear about carbohydrate loading if you're going to be running and doing something aerobic like that. And if the Capsimax would help with the endurance exercise, and then the preferred fuel when you're exercising.
Okay, the preferred fuel, sure. It really is dependent upon the intensity of exercise. So the way we look at this traditionally in a laboratory is we collect breath samples from individuals, and again we can look at that respiratory quotient or respiratory exchange ratio, which is an indication of fuel substrate usage. The numbers typically range from around 0.7 to 1.0. 0.7 indicating to us fatty acid metabolism, 1.0 indicating to us carbohydrate metabolism. So the lower that number, the greater the percentage of fat, let's say, that's being used as a fuel source. So what we find is that when people exercise at a relatively low intensity, let's say they are walking, that R value may be relatively low in the 0.8 to 0.85 range, something along those lines, which likely indicates to us that a person is probably using more fat as compared to carbohydrate, maybe 60% lipid, maybe 40% carbohydrate, something like that. You're always going to use a mixture of fuels. But as that intensity picks up, they go from a walk now to a jog to a hard run, that R value is going to approach 1.0, indicating to us that they're using predominantly carbohydrate to fuel that work, maybe on the order of 80% carbohydrate, 20% fat, or somewhere around that range. So that information actually leads manufacturers to post on their equipment the fat burning zone and the training zone. The fat burning zone typically is performed at a much lower intensity or much lower heart rate than would be the training zone. And it is true that the percentage of fat is higher when you train at a lower intensity, but the total amount of fat and the total amount of calories expended, of course, is going to be far less. Now, in my mind, as an exercise scientist, what is most important is that if they are capable of running for 30 or 40 minutes, but they only walk at 30 to 40 minutes, they're depriving themselves of all of the positive adaptations that we see with regular aerobic training in terms of overall health status, in terms of enzymatic function, in terms of mitochondria, in terms of capillary density, etc. And that's a real problem, because in my mind, you shouldn't only exercise for the sake of burning fat, because I really don't think it matters a whole lot. Because if someone's exercising 4 hours a week, what about the other 160 plus hours a week that they're not exercising? I want to know that my body is well adapted based on my hard, intense, strenuous exercise, that it's able to function at an optimal level. And I'm not so concerned about, am I really burning fat during my exercise bout versus am I using a slightly higher percentage of carbohydrate. The main concern, of course, is the adaptations that we see with exercise, and from an energy expenditure point of view, how many calories am I expending? Because we all know the harder you work, the more calories you expend.
Right. And you sound very idealistic, and I appreciate that. But the person who's trying to lose 60 pounds is saying, is there a way I can access the fat as fuel? Can I cruise on this fat fuel for a while? You know, what's going to be my best approach? And will the Capsimax, because it stimulates lipolysis, help me do that?
I think that, again, they're still going to want to work as hard as they can, you know, within reason, with the idea that potentially using something like this Capsimax may allow them to, the calories that they are expending may allow for a greater percentage of those calories to be coming from fat as opposed to carbohydrate.
Okay.
And I think that would probably be their best approach, because if they're trying to lose that weight, we know that they want to try to expend as much energy as possible during that actual exercise bout, and not worry so much about, am I burning 50% fat versus 60% fat, you know, that sort of thing.
All right.
And the acute studies would indicate that ingestion of these capsaicinoids may stimulate lipolysis, which I think over time may allow for, you know, some additional benefit, not only in terms of weight loss, but in terms of fat loss, which for a lot of people, that might be more important. For some people, admittedly, the weight loss is key. They don't really need to be concerned, am I losing a little muscle? You know, am I maintaining all my muscle? Because anytime you lose weight, you're going to lose some muscle. You know, even bodybuilders, the elite of elite, they're going to lose some muscle. Even with all the drugs and everything else, you're still going to lose some. But in this case here, I think there's a chance that, yes, they may be able to lose a higher percentage of fat if they're able to mobilize that fat. And the acute studies would suggest that, you know, this sort of agent can get that job done.